Hey, welcome back to Mr. News Art Class. It's wonderful to see all of your smiling faces. Today we're going to continue our theme about creating a three-dimensional space on a flat sheet of paper. So far we've made a whole bunch of different landscapes, from a sunset to a beach and a nighttime river through some forests and mountains, and we made a desert. Today we're going to take that thought underwater and we're going to draw a coral reef. So for starters, in my coral reef drawing, notice that I've got my paper vertical this time. Most times with landscapes we turn our paper horizontal because we want a wide horizon, but in this particular case, if we're doing an underwater picture, we're really not even going to see the horizon. And I mean, I still could do a horizontal picture. It just depends on what kind of feeling or vibe I want this to get. And the sort of vision that I have for what I'm going to do here is more of a vertical frame. So I'm going to start with a vertical frame. And I am going to use oil pastels again for this. If you wanted to, you could use markers or colored pencils or crayons. Colored pencils would work really nicely. Markers would be more bold, but you wouldn't have the option to blend colors, so colored pencils or crayons would work quite nicely. I'm going to be using oil pastels, and again, anytime I use oil pastels, I don't like to start with a regular pencil because you can see through a little bit through the oil pastels, and you'll see those pencil lines through the pastels. So I like to start and do my sketching with just a gray oil pastel. So when I'm constructing any sort of three-dimensional space, I personally like to start with the foreground and work my way back. I usually start with a horizon and then kind of work in things based on that horizon, but in a case of an underwater picture, I'm gonna just think about layering, and because I'm not actually really gonna see the horizon anyway. So what I'm going to do is start with what's close to me at the bottom and work my way up the page. Down here at the bottom, I guess I'm going to start with just sort of a sort of flat area that is close to me. Then there's going to be gaps for further. This is kind of like an underwater ledge, think of it that way. And then further away, on one side, off to one side, kind of like we did the cliffs in the desert last week. I've got this sort of surface merging in from the left, and that's sort of the surface that you can imagine somebody standing on or crabs crawling on, I guess. But then there's a ledge that's dropping off down below. So there's like, you know, almost an underwater cliff kind of a thing going on. I'm going to repeat the same thought over here on the other side. It's going to be a little smaller because it's more distant. It's farther away. And notice that overlaps behind. And that gives quite a large expanse up above, which I'm going to put in some, I don't know, maybe there will be a dolphin or something swimming through. Maybe there will be a school of fish. There'll definitely be like some seaweed and stuff floating up. Maybe there will be some bubbles in the water, whatever, things of that nature. I guess since I've already kind of given myself a gesture here of where my dolphin is going to be swimming, I guess I'll get started kind of getting a basic shape for my dolphin. So the dolphin's body is going to be kind of rounded, but it's going to come to a sort of rounded point where the snout is. And then the body itself is going to be quite eelish. It's very, you know, there's fins, but the main part of the body, the main shape of the body, just sort of tapers as it goes back and then flares out at the tail. Then we'll add the fins. Now from the perspective I'm looking here, the dolphin is kind of, you know, swimming in circles or something. And so there's the top fin, and then there's the side fins. Now this fin is close to me, I see it. This fin is on the other side. I'm just barely gonna see a little bit of it. And yeah, so something sort of kind of like that. The blowhole would be here, one eye there, this eye I'd barely see. Okay, so I've got a basic structural outline there. The other thing that I want to get basic structural placements for is things like what kinds of coral. There's a lot of different kinds of coral. What other things might be living on the sea floor? Maybe, like I mentioned, crabs before, maybe seaweed I mentioned before, things of that nature. And I could either kind of, place those in with my gray like I've done with everything else, or I could just place those in with color as I color. Now, I've got some basic placements underway here for where I want things to be. There are a couple of things to keep in mind before I start adding any color. Thing number one is something that we call aerial perspective, which is going to be even more important in an underwater picture. Aerial perspective is what we call it when things that are farther away look kind of bluer and grayer. They're fuzzier, they're less detailed. Things that are closer to us appear to have much more detail, and the coloring is much more normal. Okay, you may have seen like distant mountains look blue a lot of times, and that's simply because there's so much air in between that, the sky kind of has a bluish tone to it because of the way that light scatters through. And so because there's all that air between you and those distant mountains, those mountains have a bluish, grayish, hazy, foggy looking tint to them. The same is going to happen even more so underwater because there's water between you and those distant things. And also, things farther away are going to look much darker. So, what I'm doing up here up close is going to have a little bit of a grayish tint and a little bit of a bluish tint added to whatever colors I use. And then things that are farther and farther and really far away are going to get darker and darker blues and grays into that. And this is part of why I wanted to use oil pastels because, again, colored pencils can do some blending, but if you're using something like markers, you're going to have really bold colors, but you're not going to be able to do any blending with them, or at least not very much. So just keep that in mind, that the final outcome is going to look different depending on what materials you use. And the color blending process is going to look the exact same as it did in the river through the woods at night picture that I did a couple of weeks ago, or the beach picture that we did right before that. So the blending process is still the same. You're going to start with a base color, then you're going to add highlights and shadows, then you're going to add texture and any other colors that need to be mixed in. So for example, if I've got sand right here or dirt at the bottom, or rocks or something here on this surface, then I might start with grays because there's rocks, and peachy color because there's sand, and brown because there's dirt. I might start with some of those colors, but then I might add some white for highlights and maybe some black for shadows, but probably more like a blue for shadows. You get the idea. So it's the same process. Start with a base color. Make highlights and shadows. Make texture. Go back and add in any other colors that need to be added in. Layers and layers and more layers. Okay, so I think it's about time for a check-in, because that little time-lapse bit probably had a lot of you thinking, wait, what? How did he who, huh? So here's what I did. I used my gray and my peachy color to fill in a sandy area. Then I used some brown and some blue and some black in the shadowy areas. And then I blended it all with my peachy color. I used mostly white with a little bit of orange and red and a little bit of peach and a little bit of gray maybe in my starfish. I'm still not 100% pleased with that. I might add some yellow to it. We'll see. And then I blended that with the white. The white is starting to get quite messy, but that's okay. My little anemone, I used red and some blue and black in the shadows, and then I blended it with a brown. For the little frondy, tendrily things, I used the red to color them all in, and then the white to blend it. I'm probably going to add some blue shadows onto those, especially where I've got things overlapping. Does that make sense? I hope that gives a little bit more instruction. I'm going to use those same concepts to keep going and add color to this, what we call a brain coral. And then as I move back into these more distant areas, I'm going to be mixing a whole lot more blue into those. All right, so as I've got this start on my sort of distant underwater cliff here, underwater ledge thing, I've started with some gray and some brown. The gray, just sort of a little bit of gray in there, and then brown for where I want like shadows and, you know, where rocks are dipping into each other and things like that. Now, since it is farther away, it is going to be more blue. I don't know if I want to use the dark blue or the light blue, so I might start with the light blue and work my way a little darker. Or I might use both, but like use the light blue in the lighter areas and then use the dark blue in the darker areas. But I'm definitely going to be adding quite a bit of blue to this because it is far away. Now, does that mean that the sand and rocks are blue? No, it means that you're looking through a bunch of water to see them. I'm still going to go back in and blend, because at this point it's really just base colors and highlights and shadows. I'm going to go back in and blend with probably my gray, maybe the brown, maybe both, we'll see. But the idea there is it's going to blend in with the colors that I've already loaded up onto the page. So I've already got those blues and grays and browns on the page. And as I start blending this blue into that, this gray into that, it's going to give it a bluish gray feel. Now, as I'm doing this, I'm noticing that my shadowed areas are getting a lot lighter as I blend them with the gray, so I am going to have to go back and push those a little darker later. But oil pastels are wonderful for working in layers, so that's fine. And so I don't necessarily need to get 100% of my blending done all in one pass. I can always go back and blend some more later. So yeah, this is turning out a lovely blue-gray. I do want to darken up the shadowed areas quite a bit more. I'm going to go ahead and add in some black to that, which I will then blend in a little bit with the same gray that I've been using. I will also probably be adding a little bit more blue, but maybe not too much. I think overall it needs to be a little bit bluer. So yeah, I'm just gonna add some of the blue all around, just kind of go over the whole thing a little bit with blue, and then blend with my gray again. And so this is giving the effect that these are looking like a rocky underwater cliff edge or ledge that, you know, because of the blues, it feels like it's farther, more distant, and has more water between us and it. And just like I did in the sandy, rocky areas here, I'm putting some blue into the seaweed because the seaweed is farther away. So I'm using sort of my dark blue into the shadows, and I'm gonna pull in some of the lighter blue into the highlights. And it's just mixing with the colors that are already there. It's not like the seaweed is just pure blue. It's not like the sand is just pure blue. It's mixing those colors in to what's already there. And it might even be a good idea for me to go in and put some gray into it as well, because as I'm sitting here looking at this right now, it just looks too colorful for something that far away. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that. I'm gonna go ahead and just mix some gray right on top of the other greens and blues and colors there, and just dull those colors down with a little bit of gray. So again, base layer of color. Here I started with a gray and threw in some black to make it darker. Then I used brown and dark blue in the shadow areas. I used light blue in the highlight areas. Now I want to blend that together. I might use the gray like I did here, except then it's going to lighten everything up. And I don't necessarily want it to be lighter because it's more distant. It's going to be darker as things get down into the depths of the ocean here. To make sure that it's darker, I think I am going to go in and just add, just a little bit, not pushing hard with it, but just add a little bit more black to everything here, even into the highlights, because this whole area needs to be darker than this whole area was. So even the highlights have some black mixed into them. This is just really going to push how dark and deep everything looks. All right, so here I really did go back in with black and blue and ended up just darkening that even more with black and dark blue, because it just needs to look like it's super much further away. And for the top, like the light shining down from above is gonna hit the top. But even the top is going to be darker than the top surface of this side. So let's see. I think I'm going to completely even skip using the peachy color and just jump right in with the brown up here. That way I'm completely skipping any of the lightness, the really brightness, just jumping in with dark colors to begin with. And then just see what happens when I blend the gray. Oh yeah, I need some blue in that because it is distant, it is far away. So I'm gonna put some blue into that and then blend it with the gray. And then we'll see if I need to make it any lighter. I could make it a little bit lighter if I blend some peachy into it after the fact, but I didn't want to start with that. As a matter of fact, I will use the peach to blend it the rest of the way, and I think that'll be perfect. Because I didn't want to start with a light color and then have to, you know, work in a whole bunch of layers to get it darker, 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 darker. Yeah, there we go. And then the seaweed is going to be much darker, and as a matter of fact, it's going to be much bluer too. So I'm going to use my dark green, but just gently, and then I'm just going to put a whole bunch of dark blue into that. So I'm just going to be mixing the blue with the green. Now this dolphin here, I'm just gonna go ahead and fill the dolphin gray. I'm gonna get some shadows onto this dolphin so you can see a bit more three-dimensionality to it. Add some blue into highlights, some of the light blue, I guess, into highlights, and then add a little bit of dark blue to these shadows. Not too much, don't wanna overdo it. I am going to be blending with the gray. For the background, for all the water, I'll just go ahead and give, you know, a little bit of an example right here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to fill the whole thing kind of lightly with blue, with my dark blue. And what I'll do is have it lighter at the top and work darker down at the bottom. You can think about the bottom as kind of like the horizon back here. Right, so things will get darker as they get farther away, and farthest away is going to be down here behind. Also, you can think the sunlight is shining from above, so and it's, you know, so the top of the water is going to be brighter. Anyway, so I'm starting by just filling lightly with this dark blue. So I just filled the whole background with the blue. Next, I'm just filling the whole thing again right on top with a gray, but still not pushing hard. At this point, after having the blue and gray in there, the dolphin is kind of starting to disappear. That's okay, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to start working my dark black. Like this area here is going to be like super dark black. And I'm going to work my way up into like a dark blue by the time I get here, and then a light blue by the time I get here. And then these yellows and whites are really just going to be up at the very tippy top, okay? So how am I going to do that? Well, I'm going to use these colors as my blending colors. So I'm going to use the black to blend the blue and gray that are under it. And by using this as my blending color, I'm really pushing it on top of the other colors. And it's just getting a little bit of that blue and gray mixed with it as I go. And I really don't want much of this super dark black area. So I'm going to kind of end it right here, but fade it up. So what does that mean? That means I'm no longer using this to blend. I'm just kind of adding a little bit of black to the area right above it. Okay? Then I'm going to work my dark blue, and I'm going to use it to blend that area. That whole area where I just added a little bit of black. And I'm going to blend a little bit lower than that too. Blend it into the dark black so it kind of fades. And then I'm also going to blend it upwards. And this is going to be most of the background is going to be blended with this dark blue. And notice that I stopped my blue blending before I got to the top. I'm gonna, just like I did with the black, blend, like sort of fade that by putting more blue up here, but not like really mixing it, not like really pushing hard and blending it, just by, fading it up into, and then I'm gonna blend this area up here with the lighter blue as I move upwards. Just like I did before, I'm going to blend this down into the darker area below it and try to let it kind of fade from darker to lighter as I move my way up the page. And I'm really going to push that all the way to the top and blend with this color all the way to the top, and then right at the top go even further on top of it with some yellow and white. But this is not going to be blending with these colors, it's just going to be adding some strokes that give a sort of feel that this is like we're looking at the underside of some waves. And as a matter of fact, I might just use the white. I might not even use the yellow. Let's see, let's test it in a small area and see what happens. Okay, so I could do a little bit of yellow, but not too much. Yeah. And so that just kind of gives the illusion that we're looking at the underside of some waves here. And I'm going to kind of do that with this light blue as well, moving kind of down into the darker blue. So there's some of that, some of those gaps, some of those more strokey elements instead of just solid color. Anyway, a school of fish. How am I going to make a school of fish behind? Well, if it's that far away, I'm not going to be able to see like the details of each individual fish. I'm just going to see like little dark patches where each fish is. So what I'm going to do is just make a bunch of tiny little black ovally spots. The one thing I'm not quite thrilled with is this brain fungus. I feel like it needs more color to it, so I'm going to come back in and add some yellow into that. Did I say brain fungus? I meant to say brain coral. The brain coral. Yeah, it just needed more color to it. And I think maybe the anemone needs some more highlight things going on, so I'm going to just put some yellow into that as well. And I think that yellow is also really just going to separate it from the surrounding, especially because of how dull and colorless and cool colored blues the surroundings are. Having some yellow, some warm orangey and yellowy tones in here in the foreground is really going to help it to pop, help it to jump off the page. So I'm going to put some orange and yellow highlights in the body of that anemone as well. And why not? I'm going to put some more of those warm colors into the sand down here at the bottom as well. There you have it. I think I'm going to call that done, although I do think I want to go into my dolphin. My dolphin is going to have a bit of highlight shining on the top of it from above. So I'm going to add a little bit of yellow to that as well. That's also going to help make the dolphin kind of pop a little bit too. Yeah, that's good. Well, that's it for today, guys. I hope you enjoyed making a coral reef with me today. Next week, we will finish our series on creating three-dimensional spaces by talking about how to draw a cityscape. I can't wait to see you then.